Okay, so it'll just be five quick questions. I'll start by asking about the obvious, the stretched valuations in India. Do you think there is chances that we'll see them getting stretched further, or do you think a correction is fairly inevitable at the stage we are in?
Well, the good news, ma'am, of course, is that today marks actually the fifth anniversary of the bull market. I think 5 years ago, when Nirmala Sitharamanji cut the corporate tax rate, the index was 36,000. It has doubled since those levels in the 5 year period. So it's a good time for us. Let's remember that the index has gone to 80,000 from 36,000 place out there. Having stretched that, I think the market is ending a new phase of the bull run where the large caps, the mid caps, and the small caps are leading the market are now being transferred to the larger caps. So I would expect to see a movement in the indices because clearly the large caps, if they lead, the indices also move sharply out there. And then at some point, the market will pause or correct and we'll wait for that. But right now, it seems like there's a transition of leadership going on from the small caps and mid caps which had led the market higher to the large caps.
And in that frame of things, we've recently seen the Fed cut rates by 50 basis points. What does that mean in terms of liquidity for EMs?
It's good. I mean, obviously, when interest rates go down in America, money becomes cheaper. So money then searches for higher returns. So India has already been a favored destination. I think for the last 6 months or so, foreigners and domestic have poured money into India. I think that will continue. I think you might also note in MSCI, we become the largest single weightage of a country. So all that tends to propose. And I think in markets, I've realized that what works even better. So as long as you're going up, more money will flow into India. So I think given the fact the Fed has cut rates, is good for emerging markets and good for riskier assets like emerging markets.
Okay, and any sectoral picks?
Well, I think I used to, bet a lot on the defense theme, on oil and gas themes, technology theme. But I think increasingly there will be a larger movement in larger cap stocks where people have comfort on the sheer liquidity available and the breadth of that business. So rather than look for more larger caps to invest in at this point. Though I think some of the things that the speakers talked about today, the digital public infrastructure that is being rolled out in India, that will be a good space to. Pharma is tending to do very well. I think Indians are making a lot of strides in things like Ozempic, in antibiotics research. So I think pharmaceutical companies will do well. But broadly, I think the larger caps will do the best.
Okay, and do you think banking stocks will give good returns?
I'm not particularly invested in banking stocks, but yes, I do think they will do well.
Okay, and global cyclical factors versus domestic facing sectors, what would you sort of bet on?
Well, I think there's been a movement towards domestic sector because the Indian domestic economy is doing so well out there. We have a young population, striving, aspirational. There is a feeling that because energy prices will remain subdued now, looking ahead 6 months, so that means our balance of payments will increase. That means the rupee will be strengthened over a period of time. So our energy import bills will start coming down. And that would make some of our export industry non-competitive because the rupee will depreciate. So I'm not sure. It's a mixed bag yet. I would probably buy a basket of these stocks, domestic and international, depending on where the valuation is. But there's a tendency, I think, to believe that the domestic part of the economy will probably do better over the next, say, 6 months, 1 year.
Okay, so I do want to ask you. You just touched upon India's digital public infrastructure. In a recent conversation, you were talking about UPI and the strides the Indian economy has made there. So beyond markets, any such developments that are exciting you currently? You're catching your eye, or something you're closely looking at?
I mean, digital public infrastructure, you correctly mentioned, is very important. I think I've never been a big pharma bull in India, but for the first time, I'm well invested in a cross of pharma stocks. The Indian company is doing original research in, say, antibiotics, lifestyle drugs, cancer drugs. So that's a very exciting space. As you well know, one of the most important drugs in recent time has been Ozempic, which causes people who are obese to lose 10-20% of the body weight. And Indian generic market and the lookalike market for Ozempic, a lot of companies doing very interesting work in that area. So I think those will be, pioneers for a whole new pharma sector. We used to make not cheap, or say generic knockoffs in India. but increasingly intellectual property is being discovered in India, and very important, very prominent drugs are the quasi drugs are being done to mimic what, say, Ozempic is doing.
Okay. And given that you can quote Robert Frost almost as fluently as you quote Charlie Munger, one book recommendation, not necessarily, within the financial market space.
Well, the one I recently enjoyed reading was a very nicely toned book by Nirja Chaudhary called How Prime Ministers Decide. It's a history of how Indian Prime Ministers for the last 30 years have made the important decisions, whether Ayodhya, liberalization, budgetary policy, whatever. It's a very good read, and I think if you want to understand the history and context of the last 30 years, it's a book I would recommend, How Prime Ministers Decide by Nirja Chaudhary.